So this was my experience with neuroanatomy, delivered for the first time in the summer of 2011-2012, which I guess we can call the chiropractic experience. This neuroanatomy unit was one that I had just redesigned because we had completely reorganized anatomy. We'd gone from 3 years to 2 years of anatomy, and so I'd spent a lot of time redesigning the unit, and I ran it for the first time in session 2 in 2011, and then I had to go straight into session 3 the same year with the intensive mode version of the same unit. And that ran through from the 10th of January to February the 14th. So it was run over 6 weeks in comparison to the usual 13 weeks. Because of the time constraints I had around design, and also because my objective was actually to compare these two modes of delivery of the same unit, the structure of the unit was left completely unchanged. So the content was the same, the learning outcomes were the same, the teachers were the same, and the teaching format was exactly the same. So it consisted of lectures. Now, in the case of lectures for the session 2 students, they had 3 hours of lecture a week over the 13 weeks, and all of these were recorded. At that time it was on Blackboard, iLecture, and then I just made those same lectures available for session 3. So it was the exact lectures that they got. The only difference is that because it was over a reduced period of time, they had to do 6 hours of lectures a week. And there was one when we were doing the brainstem when, in fact, they had to do 9 hours of lectures in 1 week. So it was a lot of lectures for them to get through. And then with the practicals and the tutorials, I had a manual that I had written, which was used in session 2, and they used exactly the same manual in session 3. The practicals consists of pro-sections in the wet lab. This is where you take the cadaver and cut it into sections, and then you do a dissection of that section for specific purposes of teaching. And so they learn off those, they don't produce the prosections, they learn off them, neurological models and also radiology, so x-rays, MRIs, CAT scans, these sorts of things. And all of that is done at ASAM. I'll tell you about that a bit later. And then the tutorials consisted of sessions where they go through living and functional neuroanatomy, very important for chiropractic because they're working on the surface of the body and a moving body, and also case studies. For the session 3 students, the practicals and tutorial sessions were run on campus 1 day a week. And this is a picture of the wet lab. Usually you would see gurneys out and you would see pro-sections on them, but we can't photograph the pro-sections. But that is the actual wet lab. And so what they would have is 4 hours a week of practicals at the Australian School of Advanced Medicine, and in that wet lab. And the ratio of students to tutors there was 13 students to a tutor, which was a little more than with the session 2s. That was a 10-to-1 ratio. And so they do that in the morning. And then in the afternoon they would do 2 hours a week of tutorials on campus, not in the wet lab. And there the ratio of students to tutors was 20-to-1, as opposed to, for session 2, it was slightly higher, 23-to-1. And so this is in contrast to what was happening in session 2, where they would do 2 hours of practical, not 4, once a week. They do 1 hour tutorial, not 2, once a week. So these are the results of the study. We first of all compared the demographics of the two groups. So this group over here is in fact the session 2 group with the traditional mode of delivery, and this SA stands for summer session. This is the session 3 intensive mode delivery. And when we compared the demographics, there were some differences. When it came to the percentage of domestic students, we had a higher percentage in the session 3. If we looked at students with previous degrees, there was a higher percentage in the session 2, and that was because we have master's qualifying students. It's now changed, but we would have master's qualifying students coming through, and they'd come through in session 2. This was important. The grade point averages, again, we saw a difference between the two groups, and one could say that The session 3 students were academically weaker than the session 2. And because of this difference in the grade point averages, we did adjust our results for this difference. And I'll show you the results on the next slide. The other difference is down here, and it's to be expected. This is the hours that the students spent in self-directed study, and you can see that the session 3 spent a lot more time, but of course they were doubling up on everything, so they would spend more time studying on their own. This is the primary results that we had, and you can see here in the far right column, these are the adjusted p-values for the GPA differences. These results were interesting. So we start off here. This is their self-rated. They rated their own level of knowledge and understanding on a scale from 1, or I think it was 0 to 100. And what we found was there was no difference in how they rated themselves between the two groups. They both had the same idea of how much knowledge they had from the unit. And of course these were given out at the end of the unit. Then there's this. This is the standard numerical grades, the final grades, and you can clearly see here that the session 3 students did not do as well as the session 2 students. And that was even after adjusting for that GPA difference. It was still significant. And when we looked at the distribution, so here we've got on the y-axis the percentage of students, and on the x-axis the grade distribution. The students that were in session 2 are in the dark columns, and those that in session 3 are in the light columns. And what we found was our failure rates were higher in session 3. We found that our percentage of students that attained a credit was a lot lower. What we did find that was interesting, there was in fact this was not significant, this difference here with passes. And what was interesting is with the upper end of the grade distribution, there were no differences. When it came to distinctions and high distinctions, there was no difference between the two groups. So the other thing we did was we handed out a questionnaire where we asked them to rate the course, and therefore we could estimate their level of satisfaction overall with the course, and then also with various components of the course. And what we found here, interestingly, was that there was no difference between the two groups. Overall, the students were equally satisfied with the course. So here we have got the level of satisfaction. This was on the Likert scale, and this is the satisfaction categories. The session 2s are the triangles. This is mean and standard deviation, and the intensive mode is the circles. And there was no difference. The only difference was practicals. And the interesting thing there was that the students in the session 3s were more satisfied with the practicals compared to session 2, and they were doing the 4 hours in one go. We also, on the questionnaires, asked for student feedback, and this is the student feedback from the session 3, and it was the same thing over and over. They were saying the same thing all the time. They were saying basically there is too much content in this course for summer school. They did enjoy the lectures, so lectures were very engaging. Some weeks were difficult to keep up, particularly those 9 hours. Lectures were engaging, extremely interesting, enjoyed the teaching style. Down here the tutors were excellent, so they seemed to be quite happy with the way they were taught. But it comes back to every time they were saying it took a long time to get through the lectures. This was interesting, missed face-to-face lectures, considering that students anyway don't come to your lectures. And so the same sort of thing, too much content, not enough time. So they were basically battling with the level of content that they had to get through over the short period of time. So if I was to summarize my chiropractic experience, and looking specifically at the session 3 cohort, they were academically a weaker group. They spent more than double the amount of time a week in self-study, so they were really putting the effort in. They felt that they knew the subject to the same extent as the session 2s, but they did not do as well as the session 2s, even after adjusting for the grade point averages. but they enjoyed the unit to the same extent, and in some cases even more than the session 2 students. So it seems really to be a case of this huge content that they were trying to deal with, and the dilemma for me is that you have to maintain the same standard as the traditional mode. You can't cut down the content, you can't make it a lighter unit because it's called the same thing, and yet how do you deal with this overwhelming problem that the students seem to have?